Good evening, everyone, and again, welcome. Thank you for joining us for tonight's web seminar featuring Dr. Ryuko Kubota. We welcome those of you joining us for the first time and are glad to see so many past GCLR web seminar participants. Your moderators for this evening are Dr. Peggy Albers and Dr. Dennis Odo, professors of language and literacy at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, and Amy Pellicero, language and literacy doctoral student at Georgia State University. We are joined by our GCLR research team, Tuba Onge Crowder, David Brown, Christy Pace, Aaron Cho, Jihei Shin, Sarah Turnbull, and Jin Jung, all doctoral students at Georgia State University. Global Conversations in Literacy Research consists of online interactive web seminars with the intent to circulate cutting-edge research in the fields of literacy and language arts. GCLR as a research project seeks volunteers for a study of critical literacy professional development in online spaces. If you are willing to participate in the brief interview, please type your email address into the chat area and a research team member will contact you within a few days to schedule an appointment. We also invite you to take our survey. The link is located on the GCLR website. The data collected will provide important information for understanding our research regarding web seminars and their impact on the international literacy discussions. During tonight's web seminar, if you have any comments or questions, please type them into the chat box. Dr. Odo will monitor that area and Dr. Kubota will address these at the end of her presentation. We would love to know from where you're participating in tonight's web seminar, so please use the star tool located to the immediate left of this slide and click your location on the map. If you're having trouble locating the star tool, a picture of it is located at the bottom of the slide. Okay. I see lots of us here on the East Coast and a few on the West Coast. Thank you for letting us know. We would also like to know more about how many of you have attended GCLR web seminars in the past. Please use the poll button as demonstrated on the screenshot on this slide to indicate your participation, and then Dr. Odo will let us know the results.
Okay, thanks for the results, folks. It looks like most of our attendance, it's the first time for a lot of folks, so thank you for coming, and we hope to see you here back many more times.
Thank you, Dr. Odo. Tonight's seminar features Dr. Ryuko Kubota and addresses the increased focus placed on plurality and hybridity to challenge monolingualism, the native speaker norm, and the modernist view of language and language use as unitary and bounded. Dr. Kubota's research addresses socio-political issues of the positioning of learners, teachers, and researchers in diverse contexts, especially attending to ideologies, politics, and different forms of racism, which perpetuate the racial, cultural, and linguistic hierarchy of power, while providing social actors with opportunities to reflect and resist existing power relations. Among Dr. Kubota's numerous publications which address these issues, especially prominent is her co-edited book, Race, Culture, and Identities in School Language Education, Exploring Critically Engaged Practice. Born and raised in Nagano, Japan, Dr. Kubota has taught English at junior and senior high school in Japan and TESOL at the School for International Training in Brattleboro, Vermont. She has held faculty positions at the Monterey Institute of International Studies, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and most currently, the University of British Columbia, where she holds the rank of full professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education. At this time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ryuko Kubota and her presentation entitled The Multi-Plural Turn in Research and Practice in Language Studies, Postcolonial Theory, Neoliberalism, and Complicities.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy, and it's my pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank Peggy and Dennis for inviting me. I was supposed to talk about issues of race and language education originally, and I changed my topic about a couple of months ago, so I hope that was okay. And I do promise that I'll mention about race somewhere in my presentation. And also, unlike other presenters previously, I won't be using any videos or photos or anything, so it might be a little bit dry and boring, but I'd like you to bear with me. And so I guess I will start. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I hope you hear me. Okay. Okay, so today I'm going to focus on the multi-plural turn in applied linguistics. The multi-plural turn is focusing on concepts like multiplicity, heterogeneity, fluidity, hybridity, and social constructiveness. And I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail in a minute. And the purpose today is to discuss potential limitations of the multi-plural turn by drawing on criticisms of postcolonial theory and neoliberalism and neoliberal multiculturalism, and also to propose increased attention to issues of power and inequality. Before discussing the issues of the multi-plural turn in applied linguistics, I would like to share with you an episode to contextualize my discussion. Recently, I proposed a colloquium for an applied linguistics conference with a co-organizer, and we decided to address issues of pluralism and language teaching. Perhaps I should explain what pluralism is. It is the individual phenomenon of using two or more languages as multiple linguistic repertoire, which is contrasted with the notion of multilingualism, which is a societal phenomena where two or more languages are used in the society. But anyway, so we wanted to address this issue of pluralism and language teaching. And in our proposal, we mentioned the conflict between pluralism and the dominance of English that we can observe in various parts of the world. And then we received a comment from another scholar that says that the global dominance of English is passé, and it has been replaced by multilingualism, which is a more nuanced and complex situation in which the market saturation of English has opened up opportunities for other languages. So we were very surprised by this comment. In the end, our proposal was accepted as we proposed. But this incident made me wonder how our theoretical trends, which is in this case multilingualism, can or cannot adequately address challenges that exist in our society, which in this case, the dominance of English. Okay. So what is the multi-plural turn in applied linguistics? It focuses on plurality of language and language use. So keywords include multiplicity, plurality, heterogeneity, fluidity, hybridity, social constructiveness, and so forth. And this is one of the other terms that have been proposed in applied linguistics in the last 20 years or so, which include social turn, social cultural turn, critical turn, multilingual turn, or dynamic turn. So we're turning a lot and maybe getting a little bit busy, but this multi-plural turn questions the fixed boundaries of social and linguistic categories that are defined in an essentialist logic. Okay. So there are various multiple concepts that have been proposed by various scholars, including multilingualism and pluralism, which I explained. World Englishes investigate geographical varieties of English that are used in the world. English as a lingua franca originally was concerned with the communication among non-native speakers of English and the linguistic core of the use of English among those speakers. But more recently, native English speakers are involved, and also the inquiry focus has been not only on linguistic core, but also issues of identity, communicative strategies, and so forth. Code meshing is contrasted by code switching, and it investigates the use of multiple linguistic repertoires within one unified hybrid system. Metrolingualism describes the ways in which people of different and mixed backgrounds use, play with, and negotiate identities through language. So it doesn't assume connections between language, culture, ethnicity, nationality, geography, and so forth, but rather it seeks to explore how such relations are produced, resisted, and realigned. The translingual approach and translanguaging, very similar. They focus on how multiple discursive practices such as translating and code switching are performed in order to express meanings in multi-layered and multidimensional ways. Multiliteracies focuses on literacy activities for multiple purposes and in multifaceted ways involving multimodal expressions. Hybridity is concerned with how people create hybrid spaces in language use and identity expressions. So, within those different concepts, we can say that we see two different orientations. One is pluralist orientation, which views the use of multiple languages or varieties of language as a social and individual phenomenon. And an example is World Englishes. And the other orientation might be hybridity orientation, which views multilingual linguistic practices as products of language users' multiple repertoires that are employed in a contingent and flexible manner. And this orientation rejects monoglossic view of bilingual or multilingualism. This view is represented in, for example, a very traditional teaching approach in immersion education. So, for example, in Spanish-English immersion program, when English is taught, the students are encouraged to use only English. When Spanish is taught, students are encouraged to use only Spanish. So that's monoglossic view. But the hybridity orientation questions this, rejects this, and focus more on how people can transgress linguistic boundaries, as seen in translanguaging, code meshing, and metrolingualism. But metrolingualism actually problematizes hybridity as a fixed category of pluralization rather than complexification. Okay. And we can say that pluralist and hybridity orientations, both of them are influenced by poststructuralism, particularly the issues of multiplicity and plurality. but some scholars have critiqued the multi-plural term from a post-structuralist point of view. For example, Tim McNamara in 2011 draws on post-structuralist theory and critiques multilingualism. So this was special issue on multilingualism in Modern Language Journal, and in this article, McNamara talks about three different approaches or views of post-structuralism, including the focus on pluralism and multiplicity, which is actually addressed by multilingualism, but he discusses two other foci of post-structuralism, which include social and political critique and critical awareness of violence within social structures. And according to McNamara, the multilingualism does not always address these issues, and he discusses some examples of the English-only educational policy in some African countries, in which the students are discouraged to learn the local languages. And also another example he cites is the way in which the immigrants to European countries are denied access to maintain their mother tongue, whereas other mainstream European students are encouraged to become plurilingual through education, foreign language education. Similarly, O'Regan, 2014, critiques English as a lingua franca movement, saying that it obscures ideology, discourse, and power that underlie racial, gender, and socioeconomic inequalities of English learners or users around the world by drawing on post-structuralist theory. But I would like to argue that post-structuralist thought itself can be critiqued. So I got interested in some of the criticisms of postcolonial theory that became very popular in the 1990s and yet has not been introduced to our field. And I'm going to focus on hybridity because that's one of the core concepts in the multi-plural term in applied linguistics. As you may know, hybridity has been extensively discussed by Homi Bhabha, who defines it as the third space of enunciation. Hybridity is a space in which cultural meanings and sign can be appropriated, translated, rehistoricized, and read anew. So he's interested in seeking the space for resistance for marginalized people or colonized people who can actually appropriate or use the language and culture of the colonizer in order to subvert the colonial relation of power to create resistance. Okay. So, but there has been many criticisms of the notion of hybridity, as you can see in the criticisms of postcolonial theory, which were widely discussed in the 1990s. First criticism is that hybridity hybridity assumes the existence of non-hybrid identity. So in order to reject this criticism, Homi Bhabha proposed that all forms of culture are hybrid, but that actually contradicts the impetus of postcolonial recreation of identity. Okay. Secondly, hybridity can be exploited for the benefit of the dominant in different ways. So, for example, in post-colonial and neo-colonial context, we can see a power hierarchy between hybrid national bourgeoisie and non-hybrid subalterns or the marginalized people who continue to be oppressed. So hybridity can be a space of privilege and power. So, thirdly, hybridity is closely tied to the notion of individualism. A shift in attention from national origin in post-colonialism to subject position focusing on individualism disregards collective politics that brought about decolonization in the first place. So in the past, individualism was actually introduced to the colonial world as part of colonial civilizing mission. And also, presently, capitalist globalization that underscores individualism undermines nation states, which could stand against the capitalist globalization. And when hybridity is applied to the post-colonial scholars' professional status and theoretical stances, it demonstrates an elitist position of power compared to the marginalized people. And I will show you some quotes. And so this indicates a gap between theory and practice. So here are some quotes. Arif Jolik, who is a vocal critic of post-colonial theory, states, post-colonial intellectuals in their first world institutional locations are ensconced in positions of power, not only vis-a-vis the native intellectuals back at home, but also vis-a-vis their first world neighbors here. My neighbors in Farmville, Virginia, are no match in power for the highly paid, highly prestigious post-colonial intellectuals at Columbia, Princeton, or Duke. I think at this time, at the time of writing, Jolik was teaching at Duke University. So post-colonial theory also favors Eurocentric theorists and theories and their analysis, including that of Foucault, Derrida, Lacan, and so forth. And also, Aijaz Ahmad, 1992, referring to the marginalized populations, states that those who live in places where the majority of the population has been denied access to such benefits of modernity as hospitals or better health insurance or even basic literacy can hardly afford the terms of such thought as post-colonial theory. Likewise, Masao Miyoshi argues, as we talk about post-coloniality and post-industrialism in the metropolitan academia, we ignore those billions outside our ongoing discourse for whom life has not been posed about it. So these critics point out the gap between theory and practice. So what is the implication for applied linguistics? We need to realize that hybridity is political, contextual, and ideologically exploited in various ways. And without addressing power and ideology, advocacy of multiple approaches and hybridity can become complicit with domination and may fail to solve real problems. And hybridity is a contradictory space, particularly in language maintenance and revitalization. So here, on the one hand, we see the efforts to maintain and revitalize indigenous language by drawing on the notion of rootedness and authentication based on the indigenous epistemology of land. But at the same time, that runs into conflict with maybe the younger indigenous generation who might have hybrid identities, or who might feel ashamed of making errors of using the indigenous language, which the elders insist on a pure form of the indigenous language. But here it's interesting to point out that this effort to create and recreate this pure form of indigenous language based on rootedness is actually contradictorily based on the modernist notion of the language as bounded unit. So when I was communicating with this idea with Donna Patrick, who is a specialist in indigenous language education, she posed these very good questions. She said, who defines what counts as language? Who defines what language should be revitalized? How does one avoid alienating speakers of other language varieties, for example, younger mixed language speakers? And additionally, my question is, who proposes either hybridity or authentication as a goal to be sought on what grounds? So we need to look at hybridity as something that coexists with fixity. To continue, hybridity can become a privileged position for both learners and scholars. So I've got these also questions. So will individuals who can employ translanguaging, code meshing, and pluralism become more privileged than their monoglossic peers? Will being monoglossic become a bad thing? And will it be replaced with the neoliberal ideology of pluralism? Who has resources and access to become plurilingual and perform hybridity in the first place? Here, I would argue that there are different groups of people. One group might be privileged people with cultural and linguistic capital who can become a plurilingualism because of their privilege. But then there are groups of people who are marginalized, who are displaced, for example, refugees from Africa, who are forced to become plurilingual. And this has been discussed by Jan Bromart and others. Okay. Another question might be, can all language users, regardless of their racial, gender, socioeconomic, and other background, equally transgress linguistic boundaries and engage in hybrid and fluid linguistic practices? Who benefits from our scholarly promotion of the multi-plural term? Maybe we academics are the ones who benefit. And what benefits do marginalized students receive from being able to use hybrid individual expressions? Now, this resonates with the old discussion of whole language education, whole language approach, and process writing approach, which became very popular in the 1980s and 90s, which have been critiqued by minority scholars like Lisa Delpit and Maria Reyes. So these critics argue that whole language approach or process writing approach actually benefits the middle-class white students who already have cultural capital to develop their literacy skills. And what the minority students need is actually form-focused literacy instruction. So here, this kind of humanistic approach to literacy education, which sort of resonates with multi-plural turn, points to the gap between theory and practice. And another question might be that scholarly discussion on hybridity and multiplicity have social impact, or is it more about self-serving academic activity? So I would pose another question. Doesn't our scholarly promotion of the multi-plural term primarily function as a way to legitimate and reaffirm our own hybrid subjectivity rather than as an aid to transforming the lives of the people we refer to? Okay. The post-colonial critics, critics of post-colonial theory, actually points out the complicit relationship between post-colonial theory and neoliberalism. So the same thing can be said about the multi-plural turn and neoliberalism. Just for people who are not very familiar with neoliberalism, very briefly, it's based on free market economy, and in order to achieve the goal of particularly multinational corporations, various restrictions have been removed, things have been privatized, and in order to lower production costs, to increase competitiveness, the employment system has been reformed into creation of more part-time and irregular forms of employment and flexible workforce, and that led to the deterioration of social welfare and social safety nets, and created a gap between the rich and the poor. And within this unstable employment system, it is the individual responsibility to develop what's called human capital, which is an employability based on particularly communication skills and intercultural skills, competency. So the multi-plural turn, which promotes linguistic skills and multicultural competency, is closely tied to neoliberalism. And in fact, Pluralist 2013 talks about the complicit relationship between plurallingualism, which is promoted by the Council of Europe in the Common European Framework of Reference, and neoliberalism. And here I would like to quote Michael Hart and Antonio Negri in their publication called Empire. They say many of the concepts dear to postmodernists and postcolonialists find a perfect correspondence in the current ideology of corporate capital and the world market. The ideology of the world market has always been the anti-foundational and anti-essentialist discourse par excellence. Circulation, mobility, diversity, and mixture are its very condition of possibility. Trade brings differences together, and the more the merrier. Differences of commodities, populations, culture, and so forth seem to multiply infinitely in the world market, which attacks nothing more violently than fixed boundaries. It overwhelms any binary division with its infinite multiplicity. Okay, so but here we see a dilemma, and basically this dilemma is this: to critique neoliberal language education policy or practice, then we would inevitably have to rely on neoliberal concepts. So we are kind of caught in this contradiction. So, for example, in order to critique the neoliberal emphasis on English language learning that I mentioned in the beginning, it's the dominance of English, then we would have to rely on the importance of pluralism and multilingualism, which is also a neoliberal concept. Similarly, when we want to critique the neoliberal accountability-based literacy education, then we tend to promote multiliteracies, which resonates with neoliberal multiplicity. What's interesting is that Bill Cope and Mary Calantis, in their publication, they actually promote multiliteracies and critique the accountability-based literacy education, but they discuss two different goals of literacy education. One is to develop practical skills to cope with the real-life demands, and the other goal is transforming the society through addressing issues of power and inequality. And their conclusion is that whether you choose the former or latter is individual choice, which is also the neoliberal notion par excellence. So, so it seems that we are caught in this dilemma. Okay. So the problem is not just about language, but also culture. So let's take a look at this notion of neoliberal multiculturalism. Okay. As I mentioned, neoliberalism is to promote free market economy by promoting, trade and communication and business and so forth that ultimately increases the communication between people from different backgrounds. So multiculturalism is at the core of neoliberalism. According to Darder, neoliberal multiculturalism is built upon the ethos of self-reliance, individualism, and competition, while simultaneously and conveniently undermining discourses and social practices that call for collective social action and fundamental structural change. Okay. Neoliberal multiculturalism inherited post-war U.S. Racial liberalism. So this was in the Cold War period when U.S. wanted to increase its world hegemony by emphasizing ideologies like democracy, freedom, individualism, and human rights. So basically, it is for respecting diversity, which is at the core of multi-plural term in applied linguistics. But there are problems of this neoliberal multiculturalism. Basically, it's a site where inequalities are realigned and maintained. Particularly in post-racial discourse, there has been a distinction made between the privileged and the stigmatized. The privileged are the, for example, successful people of color, including President Obama and others, prominent figures of color, whereas the stigmatized are the socioeconomically marginalized people of color. And the reason why they're stigmatized is deemed the individual fault. So because they are not working hard enough, because they are limited in ability, they are stigmatized. So in this post-racial discourse, according to Linton and Titley, this racism is It's not about structural institutional racism, but it's more like individual issue. And also in post-racial discourse, there has been a distinction made between good and bad diversity. So in neoliberal multiculturalism, not all diversity is good. So for example, the fundamentalist Muslim culture is not a good diversity because it's monocultural, as seen in the debate of banning headscarves, right? And also, good diversity and bad diversity is divided along the class lines. For example, in Australia, good immigrants are those who have economic means and contribute to the economy of the nation, whereas bad diversity is brought by immigrants in poverty who becomes a burden of the national social welfare. One concept promoted in neoliberal multiculturalism or multi-plural turn is cosmopolitanism. We hear cosmopolitanism increasingly in our scholarly discussion, but some people criticize cosmopolitanism as reflecting individualism and elite worldview among people with wealth, mobility, and hybridity in global capitalism, while undermining the potential positive role of the nation, which could provide opportunities for workers and other groups to form solidarity. So we see complicity of multi-plural turn in neoliberal multiculturalism, in that both focus on individualism, colorblindness, and class-based diversity. Okay. So scholars in neoliberal academic institutions. So just as scholars of postcolonial theory are critiqued in terms of their academic status, which creates a gap between theory and practice that I mentioned, we can also self-critique our own standing in our academic activities in the neoliberal institutions. So our academic activities are situated in the neoliberal institution which promotes a global competitiveness. So we increasingly hear things like privatization, marketization, corporatization, increased student fees, emphasis on obtaining grants, and curriculum for developing human capital, English medium education, and documentation for accountability, and so forth. Right? So, in fact, the more, the merrier. The more we publish, the better. The more funding we bring in, the better. Okay, and in this context, trendy theories proposed by prominent scholars tend to get cited, recycled, and propagated incessantly, while opposing or deviant ideas are likely to be relegated to a form of maybe inadequate diversity. So the multi-plural trend becomes a fashionable commodity to be consumed, but not necessarily to fix real-life problems, perhaps. Okay. And the real-life problem might include dominance of English. Okay. So, for example, Outback mentions the situation in Norwegian academia where Norwegian scholars, when they publish in English medium journals, they are rewarded monetarily, whereas if they publish in Norwegian language, then they get very little or no reward. So we pose this question: do multi-plural expressions help scholars when we publish in different languages? Do we get rewarded? So, many of us can afford to use hybrid mode of expression or advocate what we wish to see. As postcolonial scholars were criticized as complicit with Eurocentrism and elitism, applied linguists who embrace the multi-plural term perhaps cannot escape a similar charge. I heard the ring. Should I stop?
No, you can keep going, Ryuko.
Okay.
We'll take
okay. One more page.
Thanks.
Actually.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, one more page. Okay. Conclusion. Okay. So the multi-plural term aims to transform hegemonic monolingualism and English-only ideology, but it can obscure actual struggles and inequalities. And it's interesting to look at this incident that Shohat 1992 describes in her own institution, where she observed the curriculum committee trying to propose new courses. And this committee proposed courses such as imperialism and third worldist critique, or neocolonialism and resisting cultural practices. And the people didn't like these terms, but as soon as the committee proposed postcolonial, then it was all very easily accepted. So similarly, if we say multilingualism, pluralism, and hybridity, it's very trendy, and we tend to accept these terminology. But then if we say something like resistance to linguistic imperialism, neoliberal capitalist ideology of language, or linguicism as racism, maybe we don't get funded. So I pointed out the potential complicity with neoliberalism and neoliberal multiculturalism. So in conclusion, in considering plurality and hybridity of linguistic forms and practices, more explicit attention should be paid to issues of unequal relations of power and inequalities, as well as our own privileged status within neoliberal academic institutions that further create benefit from discussing these issues, like I'm doing. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Oh, here's the list of references.